Today, I'm going to talk about something I'm calling the ledger of record, basically the transition from argument from authority, where corporations and centralized institutions say what is true, to instead argument from cryptography. So basically BTC over NYT paradigmatically, right? And what exactly do I mean by this? So as I'll go through, our information supply chain is broken. I want to introduce a concept called the ledger of record and show how we can use it to transition from what I call fiat information to crypto information, where data is much more audited and provenance is actually tracked. And the first application of this is measuring inflation. We've got actually a $100,000 prize for doing this, as well as a $100,000 grant in collaboration with Chainlink that we'll announce at the end. You can read about it at 1729.com/inflation if you want to skip ahead. So first, our information supply chain is broken. So every leader, looks to their feed for information about what's going on in the world today, but the feed just tells you what is popular, not what is true, right? And, so for example, we just over the last 18 months, everybody remembers, what happened, what has happened, what is happening with coronavirus, where at first, the Chinese government said there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission, and people reported there was no risk, and the Surgeon General told us to not buy masks and whatnot. And so, these three levels of research, reporting, and regulation, basically academia, media, and policy, were basically all broken. And so this supply chain of information, insofar as our society is supposed to be based on science, there's just something where it's not actually getting through, or it's not being audited, and people are just repeating it without verifying it. And these bad feeds can kill us, right? Like, it wasn't just a one-off. We're talking about, all the misinformation that got out there. The flu is more serious, and travel bans are overreacting, and avoiding handshakes is paranoid. Recode had this whole story, mocking people for it. It wasn't just that people were wrong. They were very arrogantly and condescendingly wrong in a dangerous way that did lead to people dying. And so the issue here, though, is you can't just say, oh, everything is wrong, therefore I'm just going to trust anything, put your hands over your head. We need to actually engage with the non-trivial problem of building a better information supply chain than the one that already exists. So how do we do that? So the most important tool for this, and I'll go into how this applies, to something I'm calling the ledger of record, by reference to, the paper of record or the distributed ledger. That's kind of a merger of the two concepts. And so it starts with the observation that many articles are actually wrappers around numbers, right? Sports articles are basically wrappers around box scores. Financial articles are wrappers around ticker symbols. And political articles increasingly are just wrappers around tweets. And so we can see this more clearly if you zoom in on what a tweet actually is. It's a data structure. It's literally numbers that underpin the words. The articles are actually superimposed on top of the numbers. And Twitter is the most important, feed of data that people write articles and so on about, but it's not the only one. You have the feed of coronavirus data from the COVID tracking project. You have weather data. You have real estate data from Zillow. There's all of these event feeds around the world, but they're all siloed right now. There's different corporations, entities, nonprofits that have access to them. And, an important concept is that Satoshi actually figured out how to create a better feed. One way of thinking about a blockchain is it is a feed of events. And the Bitcoin blockchain essentially included cryptographic checks on the integrity of what was happening on that feed. Basically the who, the address, what they did, they debited Bitcoin, from this actor to this actor. And when it happened, the timestamp, those three things are protected respectively by digital signature protects the who, the mining algorithm, Nakamoto consensus, protects what happened, and when it happened comes from, the timestamp. And so this is something where you don't just have a feed of events, you actually have some computational checks that are, on those events. And while Bitcoin is a feed of very valuable facts, it can be generalized, right? So the feed of data on the Bitcoin blockchain represents changes in BTC ownership, but we can represent any scarce resource on a blockchain, like tokens and digital assets and even identity and other things. So we can get a universal feed of financial facts, but can we generalize it further? So one generalization, as everybody in this audience is aware of, is the concept of crypto oracles, right? An off-chain entity that writes cryptographically signed assertions about arbitrary data to a blockchain. And these assertions can then be used in smart contracts, which is what they're currently being used for. or they can be referenced in research, reporting, and regulation. So, right now, mainly this is like price stuff, but it could be sensor data, or, whether a door is locked or unlocked, or, like policy, decisions, other kinds of things, arbitrary internet data, right? And today, oracles are mostly price, but they can be so much more. Now, price is a good place to start for all kinds of reasons. Everybody in crypto understands it. And the thing is that they're a good place to start for another reason, which is that they're perhaps the most valuable kind of information to manipulate. So if you can get reliable price feeds, you can make reliable feeds of other data types, right? If you can get a false price on chain, you can make money in a very direct way. So there's a strong incentive to corrupt and falsify this. So if we can solve the oracle problem for price, we can probably solve it for a lot of other things. It's actually a good place to start, even if it's not that obvious. And so eventually what we want to do is transition from people merely posting online to posting anything important on chain, right? Like basically this concept, just as, social network traction went, crazy from, a few million people in the mid 2000s to a few billion people today. I think that basically this concept of posting on chain, anything that you're really asserting for the record, you would post it on chain via Crypto Oracle, and that concept encompasses newsletters, testimony, paid data feeds, and more besides, right? That information you're putting on chain becomes a possibly monetizable Crypto Oracle. That's both humans and machines. And so the advantage of this approach is now we have separated fact versus narrative, right? So the facts, and the assertions, this is the data, and then the narrative is just a layer on top of these facts and assertions, right? So, the facts, basically in the Bitcoin blockchain, it's mostly just facts because, it's something where, this is the public address of the person who sent it or entity that sent it, and this is like a pretty high confidence timestamp. If somebody used OP return to put a message on chain, then that's an assertion where you can't say whether that assertion itself is true, but you can with high confidence say that this entity with this digital signature, put it on chain around this time, basically on this block, right? So the facts are on the metadata, the assertions are the data, and then the narrative is a story that you write on top of that. And a human can write that story, a machine can write the story, but we actually started to separate out, just low-level facts and then opinion. And what I call this is the transition to oracles and advocates, right? Oracles and advocates is how our information ecosystem gets factored, where oracles have some cryptographic checks on what they're saying, at least on the metadata. And advocates then write narratives based on what is happening on chain. They're the layers on top of that. And this can be a human. It can actually also be a machine that just reads the blockchain and writes things out. Now, today, the kinds of things that you can prove are who did what when. But tomorrow, as we have other kinds of proofs, like proof of location and proof of solvency and proof of this and proof of that, each one of those proofs expands the scope of the ledger of record. That is to say, you can now put more kinds of, facts on chain, not simply assertions. And each such assertion, each such fact then basically enables a whole new class of kind of verifiable reporting and verifiable research. And so that's a ledger of record. It's a collection of all on-chain cryptographically signed data feeds. It replaces Reuters as a globally accessible, machine-readable, decentralized wire service, and it cleanly separates narrative and fact and assertion with a narrative layer on top. Okay. So now with that as a tool and as a concept, we can talk about the transition from fiat information to what I call crypto information. So if we recall that original broken feed, there are actually three broken components: the research, the reporting, and the regulation, right? So the raw scientific data was incorrect, how that was talked about to the public was wrong, and then the official policy response was also wrong. We had failures at all three levels. Now, the thing about this is actually the data integrity was actually a big piece of it. Garbage in, garbage out. Why did WHO report this incorrectly? Well, because they withheld, China withheld data on coronavirus from WHO. It wasn't just China. A lot of people got things wrong, but it was something where there was like either falsified or withheld or whatever data. So there's actually a fundamental data integrity problem. And if we're making big decisions on things, trillion-dollar decisions like, the fate of the economy and public health decisions, life-threatening decisions, we need extreme auditing of data provenance, not trusting on faith. Certainly, we want to spend as much effort digging into the raw data of coronavirus stats as we do into like the various kinds of silly things on social media. So if this is the fiat information pipeline, right? This guy from a prestigious institution says it's so, and this guy from a prestigious institution says it's so, and this guy from a prestigious institution says it's so. That's just all centralized. That's why we call it fiat information. It's just, some, centralized actors asserting by fiat that something is true. The alternative paradigm is crypto information, where we replace all three levels of the stack. The research is on-chain data and code. This is actually a whole area where you can write a whole thing on this, and basically the concept of reproducible research, for example, where you don't just release a paper, you release the code and the data required to regenerate that paper. And truly reproducible research would put all of that on chain, of which V1 is the crypto oracle, right? So research via on-chain data and code. Reporting via international, possibly pseudonymous influencers using on-chain data. So it's a small screenshot there, but like Willy Woo, for example, is an analyst that uses on-chain data from Bitcoin to actually write analyst reports. And the thing about that is that's not a small thing, it's actually a big thing, because that's actually verifiable. You don't have to trust him as an advocate. You can go to the raw Oracle, the on-chain data, to confirm what he's saying. You can link to a block explorer. Yeah, it's possible the block explorer could falsify it, but then you could actually go and clone the blockchain yourself and look at it, right? There's multiple block explorers, so you can double check, triple check what he's saying, right? So now the reporting has fundamentally changed because the raw data has fundamentally changed. It's censorship resistant, it's published pseudonymously, it's globally accessible, it's free, it's incorruptible. The raw data has vastly improved in quality. We've gone to the very base level. That's why crypto information, it's not a small thing to reporting on-chain data. It's actually a very big thing. And then the third step in terms of regulation is, rather than just trusting one government, we have N. Right. So, it's a big world out there. Thing I put in the lower right corner, for example, Wyoming is smart enough on Ethereum and crypto and Bitcoin to have DAO legislation, right? Some governments will actually understand that the crypto information supply chain is better potentially than the legacy supply chain, if only because you can validate every single premise, right? You may or may not agree with the assertions at the base level, but you can see who made them, what time they made them. You can at least get facts, metadata about those assertions that you can verify, right? So this is a fiat information versus crypto information supply chain. And you might say, well, look, the COVID disaster is ongoing. It's already happened. How is like price stuff going to impact that? Well, that's a great question. So the first application, I think, of this, the first successful thing is going to be measuring inflation. Okay. This is the first application of the crypto information supply chain, because the official misinformation on COVID has already happened, but the official misinformation on inflation has begun, is about to begin. It starts with the CPI. It goes to, reporting, back in May, the inflation scare doesn't match reality. Then a few months later, oh, well, actually inflation is actually happening, but it's only temporary, right? The taper may start by year end. Okay. And this is where policy is based on, in my view, false or at least questionable reporting and research, right? And these folks just don't have better data than that. Nobody has better data than that, because basically people will just say, oh, inflation looks like it's happening. The price of vegetables or the price of lumber and so on has gone up. People have individual snapshots that make them believe this. And often that intuition is correct, but it's not simply enough to, data is not the plural of anecdote. You need to actually systematically correct it. You need to essentially outcode, outreport, outresearch the folks who are claiming that inflation isn't happening, right? So this is something we're very well positioned for as a community, because essentially it proves everybody right. It proves Bitcoin people right. As an early Bitcoin holder, one of the things about it is inflation and seizure of assets. It proves Ethereum people right, because you're going to need a dApp and you're going to need a smart contract to actually calculate that inflation. It proves for folks like Chainlink, right? Because you're going to need crypto oracles to report that. It's a synthesis of many different pieces. It's going to probably lead to stable coins. If you can actually calculate where things are inflating, you might be able to invert that to get a stable coin. So for all these reasons, we are announcing a $100,000 competition at 7229.com/inflation. Chainlink is participating in this and is offering an additional $100,000 grant if you use Chainlink to code a decentralized inflation dashboard. So you can read all about it if you go to 7229.com/inflation. As I mentioned, I think this is a perfect test bed. It's important, but it's also just a price, or really just about prices. So it's like a small amount of information that carries with it a huge amount of importance. It proves everyone in crypto right in different ways, which is kind of funny, right? It's basically like the BTC narrative and the ETH narrative and the Chainlink narrative, and every narrative actually kind of has a piece of this, right? And a good dashboard would be refreshed 1 million times per day. Like, this is something where a truly decentralized inflation dashboard that's applicable not simply in the US or in China, but around the world, would be something that certainly people in Venezuela would look at, people all around the world would look at. And it would be the next, in my view, the next CoinMarketCap, the next DeFi Pulse. It would probably be a pretty valuable thing in its own right. But it's also something which, sort of unites the clans, because we're going to need a bunch of different pieces: Bitcoin to hedge against that inflation, and decentralized apps, I think, to get the word out. So that's what we're doing. We've got this prize. It uses Chainlink, and it uses a bunch of different technologies there. We go through a lot of details on this in terms of how you'd actually potentially build this, and some of the gotchas. For example, scraping the data is possible, but it's not that easy to do. If you scraped a basket of goods, for prices over time, you have to be conscious of the fact that merchants are putting up various walls against scraping, trying to trick you in various ways. You can also try to partner with companies, to download the data. We think probably the best approach is to work with crypto merchants, merchants that are selling things in crypto, even if that's a subset of the full basket of goods and it's vectored more towards things like VPNs or digital goods. Those folks are very friendly to the concept of an inflation dashboard. And so you might get better quality data that way. So all of these details, you can go and read this, almost 3,000 word post. The competition is going to go for 90 days. Going to, email it and tweet about it. You guys are seeing it first. And Chainlink has graciously agreed to co-sponsor it with, as I mentioned, in addition, this $100,000 prize is for investment. Okay. And then there's a separate $100,000 grant in Link tokens if you use Chainlink. So go get them. centurydown.com/inflation. And I can take any questions, I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah, Balaji, thank you so much for coming on and discussing this. We will have plenty of additional resources about this for people who want to learn more about it. There's blog posts and tweets and such things coming out. But while I have you here just for a minute, let me ask you a couple of questions about this data. A little while ago, I've noticed on your feed, you've talked a lot about this information asymmetry. Is it really COVID that has kind of kicked this off? People have really noticed that there's a lot here, or this goes back a little bit further? There's plenty of other examples as well.
Oh, absolutely. It goes back very far in time. In fact, there's this really amazing book called The Gray Lady Winked, which many people in crypto have read. The Sovereign Individual, which is kind of about the future. And it's a really good book. And The Gray Lady Winked is about the past. And it is, by an Israeli journalist, and it goes into how, the New York Times company has actually gotten not just that the COVID story wrong, or the WMDs in Iraq story wrong, but they reported, for example, that Poland had invaded Germany in World War II. Okay, stuff like that, right? They'd gotten the Ukrainian famine, they'd covered that up. They had reported, misleadingly on Castro. They reported incorrectly that rockets would never happen. They said, 2 months before the Wright brothers' flight took off, that would never happen, and so on and so forth. So this issue has basically gone back very far. And so it's something where, the first step is kind of to get that undeletable history. And then we can start actually kind of going in retrospect. But if you want to see the depth of the problem, go get that book, The Gray Lady Winked. It's on Amazon now.
That awesome analysis. You're thinking on a global scale, really. Inflation is this massive sort of issue that has a massive data set. So you can pull data from a lot of different places, which is kind of necessary to this. One of the other issues in journalism is local journalism has declined recently. So people are having a harder time digging into their issues because there's not funding for whatever reason, for whether it's centralization in ownership of media platforms or whatever it happens to be. So is this a first step? And then if we can get this good data about inflation, what are some of those next sort of on the horizon places where we can find consensus and information?
It's a great question. And I think basically the reason inflation is so good is it's not simply, it's something where just the whole thing lines up. It's like a solar eclipse, right? Our community, the crypto community, has been culturally prepared for this for 10 years. It's not just about the technology. It's something where people are familiar with, for lack of a better term, this narrative that this can happen. And, it's something where, it's just a price, right? So it's something that, the price feed stuff that we've built, it's not that far to reach, right? Something like health data or something like that, that'd be a far reach, even if we can sort of know that, COVID misinformation was put out there. We don't yet have, good crypto genomic stuff. We don't yet, there's not that much health data out there. It's too much of a reach for the community at this point. But I think if with inflation, you can essentially have a better form of information than the fiat information supply chain out there now, then, generalizations are fairly straightforward. One obvious next step would be for all stock market kind of stuff to go on chain, because what you've essentially shown is that you can get better information than a government, right? You can get better information than, an academic researcher who's part of the establishment. I mean, there's lots of academic researchers, and some of them would actually like something like this. They would, the Billion Prices Project, for example, at MIT is really good. It's kind of an inspiration for this work we talk about in the post, where, as it sounds like, they just scraped a billion prices from the web as sort of a shadow statistics alternative to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And, the thing is that it's 2021. Do we think we can probably do better than the CPI? Yes. But the thing is that, it's something where if we don't do better, if we just kind of grumble and say, hey, prices are going up at the store, I don't believe this. Yeah, you can, in a sort of visceral way, just buy Bitcoin and protect yourself against that. And I think that's not a bad idea. That's like the meme, which has like the 50 IQ and 150 IQ guy, like shaking hands, kind of like that. Like there's the low IQ way of dealing with this, right? Which is like, I don't trust the stats, let me just buy BTC. And that's actually a smart thing to do. And the high IQ way of doing it, which is I don't trust the stats, I'm going to buy BTC and I'm going to create better stats. And I think that's what we want to do. And it starts with that. And then it goes potentially to arbitrary corporate, or financial stats. If you can nail the inflation number better than the state, we can probably nail, revenue numbers, accounting, all that type of stuff, goes on chain.
I think on the screen, we're on the wrong side of the distribution. I think I need to be over there and you need to be. Not only is it low-hanging fruit for the crypto native people and for academics, that this grant, this inflation as the first piece, but also for financial service providers and traditional finance marketers. Like they're considering this as well. And now that there's these links between DeFi and financial services, price feeds and all these things, it again is a nice combination there.
Yeah, that's right. And basically, you just kind of need one pretty good provider of, in a privacy preserving way of data, right? It could be somebody who has data on a lot of merchants. It could potentially be somebody who has anonymized transaction data, like, like a PayPal or a bank or something like that. You just need something where you can get a time series of a representative basket of goods, and the key is all of those things should be parameters and disclosable such that, as we discussed in the post, people can punch in their own basket of goods or have it like sort of read from data or something. I drive, I buy oranges, I use, computers, whatever. And then you see whether your personal basket of goods is going up or down in price. But in general, what it appears is that all the commodities like lumber and so on, those are rising in price because physical goods are scarce. The digital stuff will be flat or even down because, that's actually, the marginal cost of delivering another byte is not that much, but the marginal cost of delivering a block of lumber is quite a lot. So it may be something where we see physical inflation, digital flatness, or even digital deflation, and that will push people towards much, much less physical consumption, just staring into their screen all the time because that's really cheap. So I think that is actually a part of the future, but at least we can sort of call that out in advance, predict it, show that the state is actually wrong in its stats, and then maybe build something better.
And by, putting this call out to the community, there's you suggested, is there a better measure of CPI? Maybe there is. Inflation doesn't always happen unilaterally across society, right? Different social levels experience it very differently. So maybe there's different indicators. Balaji, right. I could talk to you for hours about this, but I'm not going to. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us about this and taking a few questions at the end. Again, the resources to go find information about the project will be available online. Follow everything on Twitter. And I appreciate you coming very much.
Okay. Thanks, guys.